It's Friday, and it's time for the next in our Fanzine Friday series. Today we're taking a look at Black Rider number 3 from 1981. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer, and this is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Each week on the Fanzine Friday series, we take a fanzine from my collection off the shelf for a closer look. And today, that's Black Rider number 3 from 1981. Hope you enjoy today's video. So as I mentioned, today we're taking a look at Black Rider number 3. This is the size we're used to. It's sort of a slick paper cover, not so much heavy stock cover, folded in half and stapled through the middle. And this one is done by the same group we've been seeing for all these. As I mentioned, there are 4 of these in total. And Gavin Carver is the editor of this fanzine. There's an advertisement on the back from Games Workshop. So this is a good one of the larger ones we've seen up in the 40-page range. Here's the cover art. And this art's by Steve Lewis again. He does the first 3. I don't think he does the last one. I really like this one. It's definitely my favorite that he's done. I don't know what this little creature is here on the front. It's all got like insectoid arms and legs, and has, I think, like a little picky dagger, maybe a wand in one hand, probably a dagger. So no explanation at all what this is. It doesn't tie into anything that's in the magazine. It's just some really funky art. Of course, if you take a close look down at the bottom, you'll see some chopped up body parts there from this guy. I think it looks like he's probably eaten, and so now he's resting. Looks like he's asleep to me, or almost asleep. Anyway, just some really cool old art. The editorial here is a brief one. He talks about his being the third episode, and the idea that they might do some different types of things in terms of game content: D&D, Traveler, RuneQuest, Gamma World, Cosmic Encounter. And I will note that it looks like Dungeons and Dragons has ascended back up into the #1 spot now that they've gotten some more answers in. And he's still taking in more answers and looking for more contributions from folks. Their fanzine is mostly put together by a set group of people. Looks like 5 or 6 people contribute articles every single time from his local group, and so those folks are named here as well. He does have table contents, but I'll give you this table content. I think it's a little bit easier to read. He starts off with an article about social status in Dungeons and Dragons. We'll talk about that. Odds and Ends is actually a review from a guy who created a game called Doctor Who, which he says was published by Games Workshop. I'm not actually familiar. I don't play Doctor Who, so I'm not familiar with that one precisely. But and I'm not sure if this guy is related or not. It says Derek Carver, if I'm reading it correctly, is the person who writes the article, who is the author of the game that's been published. And it's an interesting little story. He talks about a game that he put together, more of a Dungeon Quest game, and then he said he basically just adapted it over to Doctor Who, and they got it published right before the local games day in the UK. Odds and Ends are, as what we just mentioned, there's a review of a book, an atlas of the Journeys of Frodo, which they highly recommend. There's a new RPG game called Yobo, which is essentially, as they say, a gang fighting. And all rules are in here. It's only like 3 pages long. If that's something you want to do to take a break. Ruins are, I think, follows up on the Elvish language article that was in a prior fanzine. This one is on dwarven ruins. Model review, which looks at miniatures. A review of a game called Intruder, which they like. Potluck, which is some random rules and charts for D&D. Death Sabbath, which is the AD&D or D&D adventure of this time around. Cults, just a little page on for DM suggestions on how to build a cult in your campaign world. A DM's Aid, which are tips for dungeon masters. Space Requiem, which is a very large adventure they put together for the Traveler sci-fi campaign. And then Artifacts, which are new magic items. And I'll hop out of the way here. You can see the list of contributors, which are mostly the same people with a couple of new additions. So we have our first article, social status in D&D, and it's an attempt to give a little bit more background and some extra skills and potentially some bonuses to your character. Pretty common theme in reaction to the early rules. So here we roll a 3d6 just like we did for our stats. You're anywhere from peasant class to high nobility. In his view, questionable, you get some bonuses based on what class you're in: peasant class, middle class, professional class, upper class, nobility, high nobility, lesser nobility. Some things, I guess if you're peasant class, you work hard, so you get better constitution and strength. Middle class, for whatever reason, must be, I guess you work with your hands, you have higher dexterity. Professional class, intelligence and dexterity bonuses. Upper class, intelligence and charisma bonuses. So a little stereotypical, but there you go. And then based on which class you're in, you get to pick a skill you had before you became an adventurer. Peasants, trapper, hunter, farmer, fisherman. Everyone would want to be a hunter because you get a +2 to hit with a bow. Middle class, tailor, sailor, miner, carpenter, mason, tanner, bowyer, armorer. And then professional class is a merchant, shipwright, navigator, jeweler, doctor. And each of those gives you some type of skill. So interesting article. I tend to not try to give my characters any really particular background-based bonuses because everyone seems to cluster around 2 or 3 different types. But anyway, interesting idea. And again, I think pretty well done and pretty well thought through. The next one, odds and ends. And again, I think just based on name, maybe Gavin Carver is a relative. This is in here mostly because of the artwork I wanted to share with you guys. But he's talking about the background of his game Doctor Who, which he says was published by Games Workshop. And again, I think it's just sort of curious as he talks about the evolution that he had a game and he made a game called Quest, and I guess there was something else on the market, the same name, so he had to change it. He was calling it Durant's Vial, just some random name. And then he said he changed it from being a fantasy-based game to a Doctor Who structure, and then they got published by Games Workshop. Just got it printed like on Games Day, and said there he was with running it at Games Day, reading his own rules because he didn't know them well enough to have them memorized. Here's the article on the runes. These are dwarvish runes tied back to Tolkien, and he's got all this sort of Tolkien expert stuff in here about the different eras and different way they use characters. But anyways, a kind of a fun one. Model review. That's miniatures, and he talks about how really he seems to think best thing on the market, Ral Partha Collector Series, or the Wizards, Warriors, and Warlocks for wargaming, fantasy wargaming. But he said while they're his favorites, it can be really expensive to have hundreds of these models. And so maybe you want to go with something a little cheaper, and then he recommends perhaps MiniFigs has cheaper versions. And he also says, especially if you're painting like dozens or hundreds of these things, you maybe just want to get something a little cheaper. You're not going to be painting all this fine detail like you see all the detail that's in the Ral Partha series, and maybe these would be a better fit for you. Potluck is charts and potential rules for your D&D campaign, and the potluck. Let's see. Potluck this time is done for us by Wooten, who's new, Neil Wooten, and Gavin Carver. And the first one here is his idea for combat, and he wants to take the body. Essentially, it's a version of the critical hits. Head, arm, torso, leg. And you can call in advance what your player is going to try to target. And then if it's not the torso, then it makes it harder to hit. So like the head goes anywhere from +2 to +5 harder to hit modifier on your roll. Other ones go up to +0 to +3. And then if you do hit, then then you're going to do extra damage. And what he suggests is taking the person or creature's hit points and dividing them up. So many hit points for the head, arm, leg. And if you do enough hit points to that targeted area, head, kill you. arm's out of commission, right? So you could say, oh, target's a sword arm. It has 6 hit points. I do 6 points of damage. He can't use the sword arm anymore. That's kind of the idea here. And then the other one, and so that was Neil Wooten's, and then Gavin's got this one on arm wrestling. He's got a chart for arm wrestling, and so he says if you're bored and you're in a bar and you don't want to let the players get into a bar fight, perhaps arm wrestling would be a fun competition to resolve some frustration or the inevitable challenge of who is the stronger, your player or an NPC. He's got a whole chart with a d6 roll. Take your strength, divide it in half. Each player gets a plus 1d4 for randomization. You roll d6, and basically you take turns seeing whether you wear down the other guy's constitution. Sometimes you're going to do no subtraction. Maximum you could do take 5 off his constitution or off yours, and then when one guy's constitution gets to 0, he loses, she loses. So that's that one. Okay, our module. This D&D adventure is lots of fun. It's probably one session. It's not going to take you very long. I mean, even if you get bogged down, I don't think if you're like there for an evening, it's not going to take you any longer than that. This is called Death Sabbath. This is by Richard Wickes, and so people are being taken away from the village. They're seen later wandering around with blank stares on their face. Long story short, there's a guy and he's brainwashing people to become part of his cult. So there's a ranger at the local tavern. He tells you the story. He wants you to get with him to try and defeat the cult. And you go there. There's some cultists. There are guards, essentially your soldiers, that he calls half trolls, but though he makes clear they're not actually genetically half troll. They don't have any troll regenerative abilities. They're just sort of big, ugly creatures that the locals call half trolls because of their disfigured condition. They're 7 feet tall, but they're just basically big goon type guys. And the ogre mage, who is in charge of the cult, uses some of his magic abilities, etc., to control people. So you root around, you fight some soldiers, you maybe rescue some townspeople, fight some brainwashed townspeople, and try to find his treasure loot, which is pretty fantastic. He's got for a low-level adventure, he's got crazy good stuff. He's got a Vorpal blade in here, a +4 sword, a gauntlets of ogre power, all kinds of great magical weapons. But that's sort of the fun thing about D&D at the time. And he's also got some interesting thing with his map. A couple of rooms aren't on the map or aren't in the right place on the map. So there's a little something for the dungeon master to fill out. Cults. There's a very short article. I thought it was actually pretty good, as short as it was. And he says, look, in RuneQuest, we've got these cults. We don't have it in D&D, but it's a good idea. Here's some things to keep in mind. Obviously, who does the cult follow, or who's it devoted to? The alignment, how you become a cult member, what they expect of a cult member, and what the cult does for you, whether it's just sort of like a gang that they protect you. Do they give you some type of knowledge or special power, an opportunity to move up in power within an organization? Why is someone part of the cult? Some good questions, pretty simple. Okay, a DM's aid. This one's focused on wilderness campaigns. And he says basically your campaign's 2 types. Going out and finding and exploring a dungeon, or sort of a long-term campaign on the surface world, across lands and through kingdoms and stuff like that. A good point about the dungeon, he says, if the dungeon's near a city and everyone can tell you where the dungeon is, then probably the dungeon's empty because it's been known for a long time, adventurers have already been there. So you either have to explain why it's not already been emptied out by other adventurers in the years before you showed up, or your dungeon should be something where the start of the adventure is, it's somewhere out in the woods or in the mountains or whatever, but no one's ever found it, or no one who's gone looking's ever come back. And so then the first part of that adventure will be finding it. I like that idea. Rather than saying like it's on the hill, you just march up and go there, right? The rest of the article is really focused on wilderness campaigns. I think he's got some, again, good DMs give good tips that are sort of timeless. He really likes the campaign. He says it's the kind of thing that takes a long time. It's the kind of thing you play a lot. He says it's a lot of work, so he suggests every other week at most, so there's lots of time in between to take what happened last time and figure out what to do next time, kind of stuff. A key tip, there should be some sort of long-term definite objective to your campaign, right? So it's not like a one-night adventure. It's we got to do all these things to eventually do this one big thing. whether it's a big bad guy or finding something or whatever it might be. He also very clearly in favor of you start at first level. He talks about people who want to start off third, fourth, fifth level with magic items and lots of spells, and he's like, that's not, in my campaign, he just really doesn't like that. He said it's an important part of the game is starting off sort of at zero and learning and earning your way up. I tend to agree with that for the most part. I mean, if it's a one shot, that's okay, but for campaigns, certainly I think people should start at first level and work their way up. Scale, he talks about obviously the more experience you have, the harder the battles or the more complex the things are going to be, and so I think it's a natural evolution of how a campaign works over time. And he also talks about a balance between the depth in terms of rules and weather, and he talks about it. He apparently has a very elaborate weather system. He says if people own farms, he's got computer programs to figure out how much food is being produced and how much income the person who owns a farm or takes over a small shop or whatever it is. He said adding all these details beyond the pure adventure and dungeoneering or fighting. He says you got to find a sweet spot, right? Too much is just boring because you're constantly rolling tables for every little thing. Too much makes your world seem too flat. So I think again, balance is key there. And he does say though in a dungeon, he says you don't need a lot of rules because you want to keep it fast and moving. In a campaign world, he goes, you got to have some more rules in sort of depth to give it a feel of realism, which your players will enjoy. So I think that's all good stuff. I don't play Traveller, and I don't really focus on these videos on Traveller, but they did so much work here. This is pages and pages. I just wanted to give you a little bit of sense of all the stuff that they did for this Traveller adventure in this fanzine. So a little credit for that. And then finally, artifacts. I do particularly enjoy new monsters and new magical items. We've got a couple here. The Eyes of Traton was a high-level mage. He died. He invented these things. It's basically two gems, and you hold one of them up in front of your eye, and when you do, you can see whatever's in front of the other one. So you could use it for scrying. You could leave it somewhere, and then later, use the companion to see what's there, sort of like the nanny cam nowadays, right? He said there's no distance limitation on this. Because they're magically enchanted. And so when this guy died, they apparently set them in his skull, and then he was buried. So you could even have an adventure to try and find him. It's a cool item. He says this about it's nice to have cool artifacts that actually aren't overpowered. So that's what he's got. Then he's got the Lute of Palashim, which is good for a bard, and it has the ability to cast basically spells by playing different songs. One that'll put you to sleep, one that'll prevent you from sleeping, cause fear, cause valor, which basically prevents fear, wakefulness, I said prevents sleep, anger, or delusion, which could be positive, encouraging delusion or scary delusion. And then the other one is the Silred the Falcon. This lady enchanted this falcon who was her pet, and somehow in the enchantment he got super powerful. In addition to being immortal, he also has the ability the falcon does to transform into a powerful knight. 50 hit points, armor class 1, and does all kinds of damage. So you can call on him whenever you're in a dangerous situation, and there's a 3 in 6 chance he will transfer, 4 in 6 chance he'll transform into the knight and protect you. So that's it for Old School Rules today, Fanzine Friday, Black Rider number 3. Again, Gavin Carver and team from 1981. This is the third of the 4. We'll do the last fanzine next week. And if you've got ideas on other ones you might like to see, let me know. I'll see if they're in my collection. Maybe we'll move there next. Hope you all are subscribed. Tell your friends, please give our videos a look and a like, and maybe they can subscribe as well. And until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.